Hello, and welcome back to another vlog. And this is the second part of my walk around Churchley Field. I've just walked up Cypress Street here, and this is the eastern edge of Churchley Field that I described in the last vlog. Churchley Field, what was that? Well, if you didn't see the last vlog, you'll know that it's a medieval open field that was here. It's one of the biggest fields in Prescot, and it's much bigger than it was represented in 1592. It did spread all the way to the church at Marketplace there and onto Bond Street at this end, and possibly even further. There's a big open field system, and on this field there were things like Barn Croft, Churchley Field Acre, Fells Acre, and other things that were possibly the start of the Enclosure Act. The Enclosure Act was actually took place in 1750. The Enclosure Act had a devastating effect on peasant farmers, because it allowed landowners and lords of the manor, it's where we get the name, by the way, landlord, it enabled them to enclose parcels of land for their own cultivation, which meant that the old system, the peasant system, where people could farm the land and have ownership of the land. Nobody owned the land, but they were allowed to farm the land and feed themselves. That was gone. The Enclosure Act by Parliament meant that farmers could enclose their land and make it private property, and it was a massive land grab. This ancient farming way of life with common ownership for the people, well, that ceased to exist. And open fields, well, they were a thing of the past. And the very last open field system was farmed in the 1950s. In 1980, the Crown Estate took over a village, an area in Nottinghamshire, one of many places that the Crown Estate owns. It's owned by the King, and it's become the only open field village in the country, still operating as almost stuck in time. So I had the great opportunity last week of visiting this village in Nottingham. So I made a video of it to give you an example of what Prescot would have been like in the 5th century AD, right up to 1450s. And this is generally how people would have farmed back then. So I hope you enjoy the video, and I'll show it now. Okay, I'm in Laxton in Nottinghamshire, and if we want to talk about farming in Prescot, this is the place to come, where they're actually still practicing medieval types of farming, otherwise known as strip farming. And it's England's last open field village. Now, this farming technique goes back to the Iron Age. Quite literally, it puts us in touch with our past, and this is the way that most villages and towns across the country would have farmed. This open field strip system in medieval times. Whenever you want to class medieval times, whether it's from the 1100s to the early Tudor period, it's a long period of time. It's hundreds of years. The medieval period is, by historian standards, is difficult to estimate, because various historians have different views on where the medieval begins and where it ended. So this is the same system that would have been practiced in Prescot and it depended upon the collaboration of everybody in the village. Everybody in the town and the village would collaborate, and the fields would be divided into 3 fields, usually 3 or 4 fields. In Laxton there were 4 fields, and they would then subdivide it into strips, and this strip of land was based upon the amount of time it took one person with 1 oxen to plough that field. And they were ploughed in strips, and they were usually south-facing strips, north to south, on a south-facing slope, so they got full sun. And they were not, there was no boundary on them, so there was no hedgerow to section each strip off. In fact, it was just a simple ditch between each strip. But the villagers would decide on what goes in each field in that strip. So if you've got 3 fields, I mean, the one in Prescot is known as Churchley Field, the big one that runs the entire length of Kemble Street. In the 1592 map of Prescot, there were other fields around Prescot, but these were all divided into strips, and these medieval strips could be seen right up until the 1850s. The way of managing these fields was decided upon by the manor court, or the court leet, who still operate in Laxton today. They still have a court leet, and they still meet regularly in the local pub, which we'll see in a minute. They decide upon the same 12 men, and it was always men, who decide upon the field system, and they still go around today and inspect the ditches and inspect the farming techniques today. So this is a unique opportunity. Now this medieval farming system was still in place along many parts of the country in the 1950s, when it was abolished by the Ministry of Agriculture. This area here is owned by the Crown Estates, who in 1980 reinstated the medieval open field system in the village, and that's why we still have it here today. And the best way to see this medieval strip system is to see it from the air. And we've got Uncle Peter in the bag here, so I'm going to send Uncle Peter up and see what we can see. Like, we're walking into Laxton village now, just up here. And there's only 3 roads in the village. This is probably how Prescot started off, as a 3-road village centred around a church, because it's the same layout, if you like, in and out of the village. And if you go back to Tudor times, it was probably very much like this, with houses and no shops, just houses and people selling their wares at the marketplace. This is the Dovecot Inn, and I did mention to you about the court leet. They meet here, I think it's every month. 12 men, possibly women now, I don't know. But they decide upon the workings of the manor of Laxton, still today, in rules that were set out hundreds of years ago, and they still do it today. They inspect the ditches, they inspect the farming methods, that they don't divert from what is allowed in the village, what is not allowed. The court leet of Laxton operate very much like a court leet did in Prescot many centuries ago. Before we show you the Dovecot, well, we're not going to actually show you the Dovecot, but there's a visitor centre at the back of the Dovecot that tells you all about the village, so we'll have a look in there. I want to point this out to you, which was a very important part of village life and agricultural life, not only in Prescot, but in every village and town throughout the country. And around Nottinghamshire, there's quite a few of these left. And this is known as a pinfold. And this was managed by the court leet. Again, a pinfold was a place where animals, stray animals, that came from neighbouring farms, with the farm handlers can't control their animals, and they came out onto the streets of the village, they would be put in a pinfold like this, and they would be kept there until the farmer had to pay a fine, because they had to tell the farmers, you can't allow your animals to go around the village eating other people's crops and plants and going in people's backyards and creating a midden, which they did. So this pinfolds were very important, and it also raised revenue for the court leet as well. So let's have a look at the pinfold. And today it's been converted into a children's play area, as it were. So let's see if we can go in. Catch off. But here we are, into Laxton Pinfold, and it's basically a courtyard that dates from 14th century to enclose animals, and they would lock them in, and the farmers would come and say, that's my sheep, that's my goat, that's my pig. Well, can you let him out? Well, no, because you have to pay a fine. And that's what happened. And it tells you the story of the pinfold here, which you can take a screenshot of if you're that way inclined, and it tells you all about the pinfold. And it was essential for village life for hundreds of years, and it's great to see it's still here. There would have been one of these in Prescot, possibly 2. There would have been one in Wiston, Huyton, and all the villages around the Prescot area. Obviously not there now, but they are here. So let's go up to the village. That's a little storytelling area there, where you can tell stories. Yeah, welcome to Laxton Visitors Centre. Let's go in and have a look. You have to put the light on. There we go. The Visitors Centre to Laxton Village. And on the walls here, you'll see all the what medieval strip farming used to look like. This is from the Bodleian Library, circular 1635 by Mark Pierce, the original map, Bodleian Library, and was painted on sheepskin to show how the fields were divided into strips. Each farmer had a number of strips scattered in all 3 fields, so each farmer had in 3 fields the option of crop rotation. And crop rotation is something we still use today. 3-field system of crop rotation goes back to medieval times. And this way of farming in strips can be traced to today's allotment farming. Because if you see an allotment, or if you add an allotment, you know that they will be divided into strips, rods and poles. Long strips, south-facing, as they did in medieval times. So the sun, it was facing the sun in the south, usually on a slope, and the other side was the north-south facing. It's fascinating. This is a great place to come. I'm not an expert on medieval farming methods, by the way, but I'm learning. So it's very interesting. And there are walks around the village as well that you can do, walking tours. This village is only about an hour and a half from Prescot. So if you want to come here, you can do. And there's plenty of Airbnbs to have a look around. Right, okay. It's 3 hours from Prescot, apparently. Check it on the nav map. Open field system. This explains the open field system, where you've got your three fields that are still in Laxton today. Fallow 1 year, Westfield. Spring sowing in Millfield. Winter sowing in Southfield. The following year, in year 2, winter wheat in Westfield. Fallow in Millfield. Spring crops in Southfield. And year 3, summer crops in Westfield, winter crops in Millfield, and fallow in Southfield. And that repeated pattern of sowing in different crops every 3 years is what keeps the ground fertile, and it keeps things growing as they should be. It's the most economical and practical way of farming, and that was worked out hundreds and probably 1,000 years ago. And it still works today. Jury day and the court meet inspecting the furrows of the field. These men, very important men in the village, as they would have been in Prescot, the 12 men. Yes, obviously 3 men, but I think there's more here. There's actually a woman there as well. These are jurors and members of the court meet, elders of the village. And this tells you a bit about how it survived and the conservation work that's going on in Laxton today, agricultural today. And it's part of the Crown Estates, agricultural estates. And if you're looking for a Crown Estate in near Prescot, then the nearest Crown Estate to Prescot is Delamere. As we all know, Delamere Forest is part of the Crown Estates. It's owned by the Crown, basically, or King Charles now, as it's known. And that's why it survived, because it is a Crown Estate survival thing. We're lucky to have it. And in 1999, there was even a stamp published, which is shown here, that shows the ancient medieval strip farm system and that was published for the millennium. So there you go. So I hope you've enjoyed this vlog. If you have, give us the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Tell us about all about your medieval farming techniques. How do you medievally farm? Tell us all about that. Very interesting thing to get into if you're into that kind of thing. If not, it's a great insight into how Prescot and Prescotians used to live. This is how we lived before the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution came along, and farming took a second seat to industry, and all the farm fields were dug up and built upon. And there's a housing there now. Very few places like Laxton exist. So, thanks for watching, and see you again. Bye.